Let's give people one more minute and then we will get started. Well, first, I'll thank Brian Campbell for letting us use this image of the city where we all were hoping to be this week. We'll see if this is the last virtual IETF in this pandemic period or whether we're going to Madrid, hopefully. Like all the IETF meetings, this is covered by the note well. You'll find this in the chair slides online and many other places. Essentially saying that you should participate with the knowledge that your contributions may be used at the discretion of the IETF and the working group. We have an hour's meeting. This is the agenda we have. So the administrivia we're in the middle of, we'll talk about document status. Eva will talk about the COSE-X509 status. The editors will talk about the C encoded cert status. Kyle Den Hartog will talk about individual draft proposing to register some curves. And that actually brings up a question that the chairs and Ben thought it might be useful to have, which is what criteria we want to have for registering additional algorithms within the working group. So importantly, we need people to participate in note-taking for us to have an official meeting. So I would like to ask the people present if one or more of you would be willing to collaborate in the collaborative note-taking session there. Looking for volunteers.
So Christian, he'll be typing you will need only like the action items, mostly notes, blow by blow, the discussion.
Okay, so we have, your audio is not great, but I think we have a minute taker. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I'd like some people to also be monitoring the Jabber and feel free to interrupt me or the other presenters if something comes up in Jabber that you feel should be discussed in real time. All right, are there any amendments that people would like to make to the agenda before we continue?
It was noted that there is RAT UCCS that might be worth discussing at the end if we have time.
Okay. Who proposed that?
Christian did.
Okay, thank you. All right. These are the documents in the working group repository. There are 3 of them, which are the BIS documents to take COSE to internet standard status. Those are in Auth 48 with the RFC editor. In lieu of Jim Schad not being, Miller is responding to the Auth 48 comments in order to get this done. So look forward to 3 new working group RFC internet standard status not too long. Russ is leading the countersign effort. Evo is in charge of the X509 effort, and the editors are leading the CBOR encoded cert work. Are there any comments that people want to add to document status? All right, well, if that's the case, first, Matt, I know you don't have slides, but is there anything that you want to say about the BIS documents?
Well, first, Russ had joined the queue. I think he had something he wanted to say.
Okay, go ahead, Russ.
I just wanted to say that with countersign, I think we finished working group last call, and we're just waiting on the chairs to push the publish button.
Okay, I will take that up with the other two chairs after the meeting and determine if they agree that that's the status, unless either of you want to speak up now, either confirming or disagreeing with that assertion.
Yeah, well, if it's not the case, please point me to the unresolved comments.
Who's the shepherd for the document?
That should be Michael Richardson.
Okay, we will look at that. Thank you. Evo, do you want to talk about the X509 document?
Yes. So, well, basically there are a few open issues in GitHub and some merge requests in GitHub. And there is a proposal to add some additional text to the document. So let me walk you through the different points. There is a merge request from Ben and Michael Richardson. I believe those are uncontroversial, and I intend to merge them. Then there is one suggestion, I think it was from Francesca, to add a reference to the document. That should also be uncontroversial. At least that's my opinion. If anyone thinks otherwise, please let us know. And then there are a good number of issues that should be resolved with the merge request from John Matson, and there was a discussion with Ben going on in this merge request or pull request, and I think last point that I know for this thing is that we were waiting Ben to save the new text resolves his concerns. So Ben, if you could check this, that would be really appreciated. And yes, Ben.
Yes, I will try to do that in the next week or two.
Okay, thank you. And then there is one extra issue that was suggesting not using strings at all for representing some data. In some cases right now we can either have like a binary string if we have only one element present, or we have an array if we have multiple elements. And there was a suggestion to simplify the protocol by removing one of the options. My personal opinion is that this might be inconsistent with other places where we are supporting both, and I'm inclined not to take this suggestion, but if other people have other opinions, I would be interested to know. And the last point is that we were discussing during an interim meeting that probably it would be good to add some more text. What exactly is COSE X509 protecting people from? So for that text, I'm not sure I would be the best person to write it. Is there anyone that feels they might be having the opportunity to do that and appropriate knowledge to do that? You can also reach to us after the meeting. Otherwise, we will discuss and try to ping people individually or collectively with the other chairs, try to write such a text. So from my point of view, those are all the open questions for this document. I really hope we will be able to finish it soon. And there are some external dependencies on the document which kind of try to urge us to finish it sooner, so, or at least provide feedback if we would be changing anything substantial. So, yes. Are there any questions or comments? Well, I will take that as a no, so yes. Let's try to resolve the last point, and I will prepare changes for or resolve the first few ones, and hopefully we'll be able to ship this soon.
All right, thank you, Ivo. Believe the next thing on the agenda is the CBOR encoded cert presentation. And I invite the presenter to share those slides at this point. Or if you're not sure how to do it, I know how to do it by sharing my screen, which is...
I have requested to share there. So,
okay.
That comes.
Very good.
So this is CBOR encoded X509, C509. This presentation, I think it will be quite quick, and it's a bit recap from the previous interim since 110. We are now at 02, and most of the changes we have is we have implemented a lot more extensions, both from RFC 5280 as well as some other extensions that are used for different certificate profiles. We have new things are RPKI, and Russ was nice enough to provide us with an example certificate, which we now support. We also read the GSMA certificate profile for EUICC and adopted a spec to be sure to support that. Michael has provided a DevID cert. The spec should be compatible with DevID, but I will, as soon as I have time, I will test my implementation and the spec with Michael's test certificate and update if needed. It's been updated based on comment from Ilari, Russ and Michael, thanks. New is that we have test encoded a lot of certificates, certificate change and certificate bags, and we now have tables illustrating the size differences. I will show them here also. We have added initial CDDL for signing requests and certificate revocation lists. There is a new section on how to implement this in CA, or describing how it can be quite relatively easy, as you can be compatible with some of your or most of your existing code. We have released source code for this, and there is more source code progressing from Fraunhofer. As I said, the draft now supports all the extensions in 5280, at least all the certificate extensions. I think there are some CRL specific extensions that are not supported yet. The following extensions are fully supported. Then there are more extensions that are only partly supported, and basically every certificate we have seen is supported, but there are some more exotic options or combinations that we do not support in the CBOR encoding. And more comments on these would be we would be happy to receive. Then there's here more extensions that are also partly supported. And here we have, for example, the AS resources and the IP resources from RPKI certificates. The CSR looks like this, and this was very easy to specify using all the existing definitions. I think right now it's specified that you can request two types of both types of certificates, and the format is compatible with RFC 2980. I think the use cases require some further discussions. We have also not tested this. There was some discussion of the signature format, and I think also we have comments that attributes are needed for extensibility. That needs further discussion. We've done a similar thing for CRL at some earlier interim. It was suggested that C509 should support sign-in requests, CRL, and OCSP. I have done the first draft on CRL that was also very easy to using the existing definitions. I think there's some certificate CRL extensions that are not supported. CBOR encoding of them are not supported. These have not been tested. I think there could be a discussion if we want, is the group still wanting CRL and OCSP, and should they be in the same document, or should they potentially be in another? Right now this seems quite easy to include in the same document. Here's a table showing the sizes of COSE X509 and COSE C509. And the first is a very typical IoT certificate, and there's where C509 do a very big, quite big relative difference, and general compression algorithm like Brotli doesn't work. C509 also compresses HTTP certificate chains quite much. Here's two examples. These are www.ietf.org and tools.ietf.org. The next is we have also implemented and tested how C509 works in TLS. In TLS, it's specified as a new certificate format, so it can be combined with certificate compression. Basically, you have done, and if you use C509 as a certificate compression of C509, then you basically can get 2 layers of compression. Here we can see that Brotli does not work for the IoT certificate. And we can see that Brotli does not really work on top of C509 in that case. Then we have the RPKI certificate, and we can see that C509 is, to start with, a bit more efficient than just Brotli, and that both combined provides, basically, one of them provides half size and both of them provides a quarter size. And this is quite a large certificate. I don't know how that represents the average RPKI certificate. Then two different, same change and a bag. And as you can see here, what you can get, using both C509 and Brotli, you shave basically 400 bytes for these HTTPS chains. And C509 alone works for short chains, but is not very effective on large chains, as it only currently take each certificate individually, and there is it cannot compress anything that is common between certificates in the same chain. But using them both provides a benefit over just Brotli. I think these are the two main things.
John, we have
Karsten?
Karsten in the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention that John provided me with copies of those chains on the previous slide, and I wanted to apply CBOR PAC to it just to see what happens. Unfortunately, I uncovered a bug in my CBOR PAC implementation, and I haven't had time to fix that. So I would love to report numbers today, but maybe on Friday in the CBOR meeting.
Yeah, okay, looking forward to that. And here is an issue regarding that. I think conclusion on that, one option could provide Brotli in the C509 but that's not very useful for IoT. We discussed that in the interim, and Carsten said should discuss what the use case is for that. We should also discuss if CBOR packed, how that works, or if it can be used to work better. I think CBOR packed is a better solution for IoT devices. Next step, we have quite a lot of GitHub issues that can be closed. We will, using the certificate provided by Michael, to compress that and fix any things that if it doesn't work. I will also release some updated version of my software. I found some bugs, and I have now implemented at least most of the extensions, almost, or maybe some is missing. Then we have this certificate chain bag compression. We're looking forward to Carsten's result with CBOR packed. We will specify a file format, one or several, for maybe certificate and CRL are different based on draft research on FileMagick. Then more validation of different certificates, test compression of CRL. I think more reviews are very welcome. I think the core specification for IoT certificate 7925 seems quite stable at this point. It has not changed for quite many versions. Any questions or comments? I definitely draft IETF. No questions, then I close down.
All right. Well, thank you, John. The next speaker on our agenda is Kyle Den Hartog, who will be talking about an individual draft about possibly registering pairing-friendly curves. That hopefully we'll all learn some things and get something, some useful actions out of this. Kyle, go ahead.
I am not seeing a Kyle in the participant list.
You are correct. I was just scanning that as well. He is in New Zealand, so the time may not have been conducive. He's usually very responsible, but I don't know. Do people want me to step through his slides, which I have not read in detail, and at least have us review them? We can do PowerPoint karaoke, if you will.
There does seem to be enough text in the slides that it could be worth out, especially given that I don't think there's much else on the agenda.
Yeah, the only other thing is AOB, so let's go ahead and try to do that. And this time I figured out, with the help of my co-chairs, how to use the slide presentation functionality. For the minutes, I'm curious what fraction of you, of course, we're not in person. I can't just have people raise hands easily. I'm curious how many of you have heard of what they call pairing-friendly curves in the cryptographic literature. Maybe those of you who know something about it can say something in the chat, just for the record. These are used for zero-knowledge proof algorithms, some of which are being used in the decentralized identity world at this point. That much background I do know for sure. So Kyle authored this. There's a company in New Zealand, Matter, that he and some other folks I know are working on DID-based identities using verifiable credentials. And there's a scheme for zero-knowledge proof called BBS plus signatures. Let's see, Dan Benet, who's a long time ago Usenix's friend of mine, is one of the Bs who was the inventors of that signature scheme. And their choice of curves for this scheme is something called BLS 12381, and there's different representations of that. And currently there's no either Jose or Cose registrations for those curves or any of the friends of theirs. So what they've done is they, and there is an IETF document, as he points out, on pairing-friendly curves, and this builds upon that. So the notion of pairing-friendly curves is known to the IETF, which are our crypto experts. And it does registrations for the 128-bit security and 256-bit security curves for these curves. Number of points which you can read as well as I, but one of them is what's the best way to encode the keys. So in this working group, we would probably say use a CBOR web key. In the ex-Jose working group, we would say you want to use a Jose representation. I know there's other representations in the wild for compressed point curves that just use the number in the DID world. I'm not advocating that, but I think that's what he's. So I'd asked a question to Kyle offline. I felt like this was kind of incomplete because curves without corresponding signing algorithms, or at least saying how to make use of them, sort of don't give us an end-to-end solution. Now, I recognize that in his use case, there's a W3C community group defining the use of this particular BBS plus scheme, and so this would support that. But in general, I would think in the IETF, we want to have sort of end-to-end registrations to make things usable. There's a notion of subgroups to be used with the curve, which I am not enough of a cryptographic mathematical expert to be able to explain that to you. I know some of the proposals have just said represent the subgroups as different curves. There's other possibilities. He's asking what would be the best path forward for this draft. And the last bullet I really can't speak to about curves registered with prohibited status. I don't know, is anybody on the call enough of an expert to shed any light on the last point?
So I will, I guess, chime in unless Jonathan wants to join the queue. But my understanding here is that the BN256 G1 and G2 are going to correspond to these subgroups that were in the third bullet point. And so my sense is that in general, it's good to have identifiers for these things if we are going to need to refer to them. And the code point space for curve names is not particularly scarce. So on the face of it, the proposal to register these, but to have in the comments or other notes an indication that these are sort of placeholders. They're not expected to be used for actual signatures, but they might appear in protocol elements that require a curve for some of these other uses that take advantage of the pairing-friendly nature of these curves. So on the face of it, the proposal to register them but give them a prohibited status does seem to make some sense. But I will yield to Jonathan, who has gotten into the queue.
Jonathan? You are muted.
Yeah, double click. Yeah, so the issue with the BN256 curves is that there was an attack that reduced, they were believed to have 128-bit security, but there was an attack that reduced the security to 100 bits. So generally they were well deployed, but there's been a number of efforts in different standards organizations to define new, more secure BN curves.
Okay, thank you for that background, Jonathan. I'm going to move to the next slide. And he's asking for questions. Does anybody want to say anything else about this draft for the meeting minutes?
Well, I think I think the one thing we need to discuss at some point is the format, so that there are several references to SEC1. Here, is that really the format we want these to be in? Or do we actually use something more like OKP? Yeah, I haven't read the IETF draft this is apparently based on, so that seems to be stuck on the document shepherd for 54 days, so we probably have to ask Stanislav what status that has.
Ben?
Sorry, I thought I had seen Yaron in the queue as well, so I thought I was going to have a little bit more time. On the question that Karsten raised about the SEC1 encoding versus OKP, that might actually tie in nicely to the next item on the agenda, which was about the criteria for registering additional algorithms. And I think I had kicked off a little bit of a thread that touched on this topic as well. And it seems like the general sense, or I hesitate to use the word consensus, but the general sense I got was that the OKP is generally going to be preferred if there's no specific reason to prefer SEC1. And so I would support that, since if we can use OKP, that would be good. So the question, I guess, would be then to Kyle or to anyone else about whether there's existing deployments where these curves are strongly associated with the SEC1 encoding, because we don't want to go off and do something different just for the sake of something different. We should try and be consistent with the ecosystem as it stands.
Okay, any more questions? Otherwise, I propose that we move to the next topic, which was actually prompted among the chairs, because of this presentation, I'd both to pick the brains of the working group members and possibly Ben as AD. And how should we be thinking about when it makes sense to accept a draft to register new cryptographic algorithms and curves, and what criteria we want to apply? I know we are chartered for being able to do that. It won't stay in existence forever, but there may be some additional algorithms and curves coming our way. I'm here to listen, not to drive that. So it's open mic on what algorithms and curves we should be registering and why. And I'll let this go about 10 minutes, and then I'll try to save the last 10 minutes for AOB.
Nice.
Brendan, go ahead.
I think there's a big argument to be made for starting to register some PQC algorithms. There's obviously going to be a lot of interest in that, especially once the NIST competition finishes. And certainly there's already been some discussion of these where stateful hash-based signatures are concerned. So I think that we should probably consider taking a role in registering PQC algorithms.
Let me, as chair, ask a follow-up question. Can you educate us for 30 seconds on the nature of the competition that you're describing and what the outcomes are expected to be?
So while I'm by no means an expert on this topic, my understanding is that there is an ongoing competition for both key agreement and signing. And so as such, it fits in where we use ephemeral static ECDH, for example. And we would probably want to consider something in a similar space. And likewise, there's a number of algorithms for signing as well. Now, obviously, I think Rust has already put through one on the topic of stateful hash-based signing. I think we've already registered that algorithm. So along the same vein, I would argue that we probably should be prepared once that finishes to look at registering algorithms for the winners of the NIST competitions.
That certainly makes sense. Goran, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in also on this discussion. So I'm one of the designated experts for certain COSE code points, and
Yep.
Together with Derek and Sean, we were very happy with Jim Shard being around, because he was very eager to provide input about registration requests. So we basically followed his advice. And when we now have been asked to review, we have been looking at the patents in RFC 8152 and so on. Admittedly, it's not always clear how these registrations should be made. In some cases, it's quite clear. But there are corner cases and so on. So I mean, Jim he knew very well about Jose and EKIC's assignments. So it's definitely a conscious decision here, and some of the constructions are made for good reasons. So like, for example, issues with truncation of hash algorithms and how you need to be explicit of that. And there are rules like, which we may want to deviate from, but there at least are rules now in the current allocations, like signature algorithms are typically bundled with a hash function to pre-digest the signature input, but they are not bundled with an elliptic curve. Instead, algorithms use specific key type, and the key will indicate the curve. CRV is one of the COSE key parameters. Another example is Diffie-Hellman algorithms, which are bundled with this designation of ephemeral static, but not elliptic curve, so on. And then there are also exceptions like this ES256K, which is bundling also with hash algorithm and curve. So I just want to say that if we are deviating from what's currently defined in the COSE generators, we do want to make COSE available for many other SDOs and deployments. I think that's really good. But if we want to change a lot, then we need to proceed quite carefully, because we risk creating a greater mess than it's already there. So we should have a plan for, I think, for how to deviate from that, or how to assign, which probably is something we won't crack in a working group meeting. That probably needs some larger effort beyond that. Another item I'd like to add is that, in particular, we should be careful with short identifiers. They are handed out to applications that really need them. So PQC algorithms would probably not fit into the category of short identifiers. Yeah,
Sure.
My 2 cents.
Karsten, you're in the queue.
Yeah, I got in the queue to just quickly say that just because the NIST competition is complete doesn't mean that we have an algorithm to register, because they usually need some time to write up the result and to derive some actually standards compatible description of what they actually have. But on Jörn's point, I think we really need to address this. I think we actually should write a document that explains the guidelines that we are using. That will probably at some point become a BCP, but I think it's important that we start writing these things up, so it's not just law that is traded from the engines, but we can just point to a document, look, this is what we have decided. And so one of the things that Ben just said, we prefer OKP over SEG1, but how would a registrant know that? So I think we really have to write this up and start a new document with this BCP information.
Good point. I do know that, from Jose and some other contexts, we wanted things to be registered that we expect to be commonly used. Not that you couldn't register esoteric things, but there's also the criteria that the designated experts at least want to believe that there's been a public cryptographic analysis of the safety and effectiveness of the algorithm. This is where, I'm a complete novice in the pairing-friendly curve space, for instance. I would want to defer to the CFRG and or other experts about which of these probably passes muster. That said, we don't want to make experimentation hard by not having common algorithms. So let's see, I'll recognize Brendan, and then I'd like to ask to close this out if Ben wants to say anything from the IESG perspective. Brendan?
Yeah, so one of the things you just mentioned brings up an important topic. You said that you want some kind of indication that there's been cryptographic analysis and that the algorithms we register have had some kind of security review behind them. So that brings me to the question of, what do we do about independent submissions that register an algorithm identifier? To an outside observer, those might appear to have exactly the properties you've mentioned, but because they haven't gone through the regular stream, there's no expectation that they have had that review. So I'm just curious what the working group's take on that is.
I do know that our registries have a field for the documents that in which that analysis was supposed to have been done. So we wouldn't even accept a registration if there's no evidence provided. I'm not saying that's a fail-safe check, but it's a start.
Okay, thank you.
John, and then I'm going to ask Ben to speak.
Yeah, I think the current recommended column, which it can be yes or no recommended, is maybe too little. I think it would be good to have more flexibility here, to add more information. Similar discussions have been had in the TLS working group, which also have a single recommended column. And I think the conclusion in earlier discussions is that that's not enough. It should be updated in the future.
Indeed, Jose has more granularity as a result of some input from Sean Turner when he was AD, but Jose is binary, although I think we have a deprecated or prohibited value as well as yes or no. But okay, Ben, do you want to make any closing remarks to this discussion, and then I'll move on to AOB?
Yeah, thanks for passing it over to me. I think the points that Yaron and Carsten were making are good ones. That it would be good to have some clarity about our expectations and to write it down so that it's available for people who are asking for registrations. It's definitely not something we resolved in this session or we're planning to resolve in this session. I mentioned in the chat, hopefully Carsten can volunteer to help start writing those down in the form of a draft. And so I look forward to seeing that kind of guidance written up. I think it's within the current charter to be able to do that, and it's very useful to do. So I think there's potentially a new milestone that we should put into the data tracker for the working group to track this work and how quickly we think we can do it. But I think there were some good comments and some good suggestions here, so hopefully we can continue the discussion on the email list.
All right, thank you all. Let's go to AOB, and there was a request to discuss the RATS UCCS draft. Please come to the queue and speak. Hank, why don't you speak?
Yeah, so hi. I'm just pressing buttons so I'm here. Let me turn on my camera. Hi. So I assume there's a question associated to the topic of UCCS.
Well, the first thing is that we maybe could say what it is.
Oh, okay. I see.
A CWT is by definition always protected with COSE armor around it. And it turns out you sometimes want to interchange unarmored, unprotected data structures that contain the claims sets from a CWT. So, I mean, this is technically entirely trivial, but we have to write it up. And we probably also have to write up some security considerations because, these are not CWTs, so you cannot use them the same way you would use CWTs. You would use them in communicating about things that might go into a CWT, and you would use them on secure channels. And we have to describe what the properties of these secure channels are and so on. So this is what the UCCS document is about, and Henk has more about that.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's very useful. Go ahead.
So Jim did not like this. so it's the null cipher in
No.
Let me finish.
Looking like a CWT, so you cannot confuse it with a CWT like with a null cipher.
Let me finish the story. So
yeah,
Jim didn't like this because he said it is like a JWT with a null cipher, which it is not.
Much
because yeah, JWTs with the null cipher are much worse. That is correct. So you mean that?
Is it just the CWT claims without the cryptographic wrapper?
There is a definition in CWT that defines claims sets.
Yes.
And it is exactly that. It
okay.
But we want to retain the guarantees that comes with the CWT. So now you need an alternative, and the alternative is the conveyance method here, and
yes.
that is then providing the same guarantees and as the CWT would have done on object security, and that is unfortunately application specific. So the guarantees you expect from a CWT are intrinsic to the object of the CWT, but they are not intrinsic to the arbitrary channel that is secured somehow. So these
right.
channels have to be established under certain circumstances. When you receive something that is a claim set, then you suddenly are burdened with responsibility. Maybe it's the burden of the responsibility of the issuer. Maybe it's a dedicated role that you define in your scenario. And therefore you can't just define UCCS as the claim set that are encased in a CWT and done. No, you have to always provide, and I think that was Carsten hinting at, a security consideration that is specific to the user scenario. But the core, of course, is relatively easy. It's an unprotected claim set. Yeah.
I think it's important to clarify this, because the UCCS is an unprotected claim set. It's unprotected. And the rest of the document is a little bit speculative and tells you what properties a secure channel might have to have, so you can make useful use of an UCCS in the same way that you could make use of a CWT. And it's a bit unfortunate that we are forced to put the two things into a single document because it really confuses the issue, but that's where we are.
I'll state, not wearing my chair hat, just as a point of comparison, OpenID Connect does utilize a JOT set in one flow without it being a JOT. There's this thing called a user info endpoint, which must be protected by TLS, where you send claims about the end user, such as your first and last name, if you choose to disclose those, that are just sent as bare claims. Now they use the JOT registrations, but they're protected by TLS, not protected by JWS, as a point of comparison that is in the wild.
Yeah, I think we have to, if it's comparable, we have to check that, because every, let's call it, similar example, a proof of concept here is extending the intuitive message that we want to convey here. But it is not intuitive, unfortunately, without context. And yeah, maybe in another example would provide that. Thank you.
I'm putting that into the chat for the minutes.
Yeah, thank you. So there was a lot of arguing, and we are closing to the bottom of the hour, but there was a lot of arguing. Can we just say UCCS is a standalone claim set? And I think I'm convinced that the answer is no. It has to be context specific due to their security considerations in the context.
Okay, well, this is certainly a relevant topic. Thank you for the explanation. We are at time. Does anybody want to make a final remark, or otherwise we'll end here, and thank you for your participation.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in to say thanks to Henk and Karsten for letting us know about UCCS and why it's not as simple as it might appear. It seems like we should probably continue discussion about that on the RATS group that's in, Karsten, on the appropriate list where the document is actually homed, which I'm pretty sure is RATS, but we will check shortly. But thank you again for bringing it up here. But that was all I had to summarize.
All right, thank you all. We'll see you in another meeting or on the list. Take care.